Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I just landed after the most ridiculous 7-hour flight of my life, and I need to get this story out before I crash from exhaustion. I'm 33 and travel for work pretty regularly, so I thought I'd seen it all. Nope. I work as a marketing consultant, which means I'm constantly flying between client meetings across the country. After 5 years of this job, I've developed a system. I always book Southwest because I like the flexibility, even though it means dealing with their open seating policy. I'm pretty tall at 5'9", so I make sure to check in exactly 24 hours before my flight to get a decent boarding position. This particular trip was coming back from a 3-day conference in Seattle, and I was exhausted but managed to snag a spot in the B boarding group. The flight was packed solid, which isn't unusual for a Friday evening cross-country route. I headed straight to the back of the plane because that's where you can usually find aisle seats when you're not in the A group. I found a perfect spot about 6 rows from the back and settled in with my carry-on tucked under the seat in front of me. I pulled out my Kindle and headphones, ready for a long but comfortable flight home. That's when she showed up. I could hear the commotion before I saw her. This woman was arguing loudly with the flight attendants near the front of the plane about her massive roller bag that clearly wasn't going to fit in any overhead compartment. She was holding up the entire boarding process, and I could see other passengers getting annoyed as they waited in the aisle behind her. Finally, she stomped toward the back of the plane, dragging her oversized bag. She had obviously waited until the last minute to check in because she was near the end of the C boarding group, which meant she was stuck with whatever seats were left. I braced myself because I knew she was probably going to end up in my row. Sure enough, she stopped right at my row and stared down at me. She barked at me to move, her voice sharp and demanding. I looked up at her, completely confused by her aggressive tone, and asked her what she meant. She then declared that she had paid for an aisle seat and claimed I was sitting in her seat. I stared at her, still confused because I knew Southwest didn't have assigned seating, and asked her what she was talking about again. This made her even angrier, and she practically screamed that she had paid for an aisle seat and that I was in her spot. She was so loud that every passenger within 5 rows was staring at us. I felt my face getting hot with embarrassment, but I knew I was in the right. I told her that this was Southwest and there were no assigned seats. She called me stupid and insisted that she needed the aisle seat. The way she said it made my blood boil, but I tried to stay calm. I figured maybe she had some medical reason for needing the aisle, though she hadn't mentioned anything like that. I offered to get up so she could have the middle seat if she wanted. I was being reasonable, offering her the middle seat so she could at least sit in our row. But apparently, that wasn't good enough for her. A flight attendant came over, looking frazzled from dealing with this woman's bag situation earlier. The flight attendant told her she needed to take a seat so they could get the flight moving. I stood up to let her into the row, assuming she would take the middle seat like any normal person would. Instead, she immediately plopped down in my aisle seat like she owned it. I protested that it was my seat, but she just kept repeating loudly that she had paid for an aisle seat. She kept saying this like it was some kind of magic phrase that would make assigned seating suddenly exist on Southwest. I looked at the flight attendant for help. I explained to the flight attendant that there weren't assigned seats on Southwest and that I had been there first. The flight attendant looked exhausted and kept looking toward the front of the plane where her colleague was probably wondering what was taking so long. The flight attendant started to say something to help, but Karen interrupted by screaming again that she had paid for an aisle seat. At this point, other passengers were starting to turn around and stare. I could see the annoyance on their faces, but it wasn't directed at her. They were looking at me like I was the problem for not just giving in. We were already 30 minutes delayed and everyone just wanted to get in the air. The flight attendant gave me this pleading look that basically said, "Please, just let her have this, so we can move on." I looked around at all the other passengers who were clearly thinking the same thing. Nobody wanted to deal with this woman's tantrum for the next 7 hours. I'm usually pretty passive when it comes to confrontation. I hate making scenes, and I especially hate being the reason a flight gets delayed. Even more. So against my better judgment, I decided to just give in. I told her fine, whatever, she could have the seat. Karen didn't even have the courtesy to get up so I could slide into the middle seat. I had to awkwardly step over her legs while she sat there with this smug look on her face. She had won, and she knew it. But here's the thing about me that most people don't know until they really push me too far. I might be passive, but I'm also incredibly petty when someone really gets under my skin. And this woman had just humiliated me in front of an entire plane full of people. I settled into the middle seat and put on my over-ear headphones. I pulled out my Kindle and tried to focus on my book, but I was seething. She kept making little comments about people who don't understand how airlines work and how some people are so entitled. The irony was completely lost on her. About an hour into the flight, I started feeling that familiar pressure in my stomach. I usually get pretty gassy on airplanes. Something about the cabin pressure just doesn't agree with my digestive system. Normally, I try to hold it in or make discreet trips to the bathroom when things get really bad. But sitting there next to this awful woman who had stolen my seat, I had a different idea. I decided I wasn't going to make any bathroom trips on this flight. The first one was small, just a little test. I let it out silently and waited to see if she would notice. She did. I watched out of the corner of my eye when she wrinkled her nose and looked around like she was trying to figure out where the smell was coming from. When she realized it was me, she shot me this disgusted look. I just kept reading my book like nothing had happened. 20 minutes later, I let out another one. This time it was bigger and definitely smellier. She actually made a little gagging sound and waved her hand in front of her face. I adjusted my headphones and turned the page of my book. For the next 6 hours, I unleashed a steady stream of the most toxic farts I've ever produced in my life. And lucky for me, they were particularly potent that day. Maybe it was the airport food I'd eaten earlier, or maybe it was just karma, but every single one was absolutely horrific. Karen would sniff, realize what had happened, and then stare at me with pure hatred. But what could she say? I wasn't technically doing anything wrong. I was just sitting there reading my book and listening to music. If my body happened to be producing natural gases, well, that was just biology. Around hour 3, she started making passive-aggressive comments about how some people have no consideration for others. I turned up my music. She complained about how disgusting it was when people behave badly in public. I turned the page of my book. By hour 5, she was clearly at her breaking point. She kept shifting in her seat, pressing the air vent button above her head and shooting me looks that could kill. Finally, she'd had enough and pressed the call button. When the flight attendant came over, Karen said she needed to move seats because there was a situation in her row. The flight attendant apologized but explained that they were completely full and there weren't any available seats. Karen protested that this was unacceptable, but the flight attendant told her she understood the frustration, but there was nothing she could do since they'd be landing in about 2 hours. The flight attendant walked away, and Karen looked like she was about to have a complete meltdown. I could see her weighing her options, probably considering whether to make a bigger scene. But I guess she'd seen enough airplane freak-out videos online to know that wouldn't end well for her. For the last 2 hours of the flight, she sat there in misery while I continued my biological warfare campaign. Every 15 to 20 minutes, I'd release another silent but deadly weapon. She tried covering her nose with her shirt, pressing her face toward the window, even putting on a face mask she dug out of her purse. Nothing helped. When we finally started our descent, I could see the relief on her face. She probably thought her nightmare was almost over. That's when I decided to give her one final farewell gift. When we were taxiing to the gate, I let out the biggest, most toxic fart of the entire flight. It was so bad that even I was impressed with myself. The smell was immediate and overwhelming. Karen actually made a choking sound and looked like she was about to throw up. Since we were sitting near the back of the plane, we had to wait while everyone else got off first. That meant she got to sit in my toxic cloud for several more minutes, breathing in the fruits of my labor while I packed up my things. When it was finally our turn to deplane, I stood up and grabbed my carry-on. When I stepped into the aisle, I looked down at her and sarcastically thanked her for the aisle seat. I walked off that plane feeling better than I had in years. Not just because I was finally off the flight, but because for once in my life, I'd stood up to a bully in my own way. Sure, it wasn't exactly dignified, but it was effective. I've been working in tech for about 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing prepared me for the level of entitled stupidity I dealt with at my last company. I started there 3 years ago as a senior developer. It was supposed to be a straightforward job: write code, fix bugs, attend some meetings. The company was growing fast, and they needed someone with my experience to help stabilize their main product. What I didn't know was that I was walking into a complete organizational mess. Within my first month, I noticed things were falling through the cracks everywhere. The project manager barely knew what version control was, let alone how to actually manage a software project. The team leader spent most of his time in meetings talking about synergy and disruption while the actual work piled up. Meanwhile, clients were calling constantly because deadlines were being missed and features weren't working. I'm not the type to just watch things burn, so I started picking up the slack. I began organizing the development sprints myself, coordinating with different teams, and even talking directly to clients when they had technical questions. Before I knew it, I was doing 3 jobs while getting paid for one. Everything started working perfectly. Projects were delivered on time, bugs got fixed quickly, and clients were actually happy for once. My manager loved taking credit for the turnaround in our department's performance. After about 6 months of this, I figured it was time to ask for what I deserved. I scheduled a meeting with my manager and laid out everything I was doing. I explained that I was basically doing the work of a developer, project manager, and team leader all at once. He complimented my work and said I was doing really impressive stuff. Then I brought up wanting a raise that reflected the actual scope of what I was handling. His response floored me. He told me I was being paid competitively for a senior developer position and that we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. When I pointed out that I wasn't just doing senior developer work anymore, he brushed it off. He said nobody was forcing me to do all that extra stuff, and if I wanted to just stick to coding, that was fine by him. This guy was essentially telling me that all the work keeping his department afloat was just voluntary overtime that he didn't value. Over the next year and a half, I kept having variations of this same conversation. Every few months, I bring up the disconnect between my responsibilities and my compensation. And every time, my manager would give me the same response. He'd acknowledge that I did spectacular work, but then he'd say that they didn't ask me to do all of this extra stuff, so he didn't know why I should get paid more than other people. The final straw came during my annual review. I'd just finished explaining how I'd single-handedly rescued a project that was 3 months behind schedule and about to cost the company a major client. My manager called it great initiative, but then he reminded me that initiative was something they expected from all employees. He said it wasn't really above and beyond. I asked him if managing a team of 5 developers, rebuilding the entire database architecture, and personally flying to the client side to fix their integration issues was just regular initiative. He actually had the nerve to tell me that when I put it like that, it sounded more dramatic than it actually was. That night, I went home and really thought about the situation. I was burning myself out doing work that my manager didn't even acknowledge, let alone appreciate. I decided to try an experiment. The next Monday, I came in and did exactly what was in my job description. Just my developer tasks. Nothing more, nothing less. When people came to me with project management questions, I redirected them. When clients called with concerns about timelines, I told them to contact the project manager or my boss. At first, it felt weird. I'd gotten so used to being the person who fixed everything that sitting back and watching problems pile up went against every instinct I had. But I stuck with it. Within 2 weeks, things started getting shaky. The project manager couldn't figure out why the development timeline kept shifting. The team leader kept scheduling meetings about problems that should have been solved weeks ago. Clients were getting frustrated with getting bounced between different people who couldn't answer their questions. When clients called me directly about integration issues they thought I was handling, I politely explained that I wasn't in charge of that anymore. I told them they should contact the project manager or my manager instead of me. They seemed confused, especially since I was the one who had understood their system requirements in the past. I just kept repeating that coding was my job now, nothing more. By month 2, the panic was setting in. Multiple projects were behind schedule. 2 clients had sent formal complaints to upper management. The project manager had basically stopped showing up to work regularly because he couldn't handle the pressure. My manager started dropping hints that I should step up and help out with the crisis. He mentioned how chaotic things were getting and suggested I could lend a hand with some of the project coordination. I politely declined, reminding him that project coordination wasn't in my job description. I pointed out that he'd made it pretty clear I should stick to my developer role. He tried to argue that this was an emergency situation, but I countered that emergencies were exactly when clear role definitions mattered most. He didn't have much to say to that. Month 3 was when everything completely fell apart. We lost our biggest client because a project that should have taken 6 weeks had dragged on for 4 months. The team leader got fired after upper management realized he'd been doing basically nothing for years. 2 other developers quit because they couldn't handle the chaos. That's when I got the call to come to my manager's office. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He demanded to know why everything was falling apart and insisted that I needed to do something about it. I told him that I didn't think I needed to do anything. When he protested that the department was in crisis mode, I agreed that it was terrible, but pointed out that it wasn't my job to fix it. He tried to appeal to team spirit, saying that sometimes we all needed to pitch in. That's when I laid it all out for him. I explained that for years, he never asked himself how it happened that everything worked so fine. He just took credit for the results while telling me that the work I was doing didn't deserve recognition or compensation. I told him that the only thing different now was that I'd stopped doing what wasn't in my contract. I watched his face when I explained that I'd let things fall down to their natural level. I told him I was glad it had happened because only now did he notice the work I was actually doing all along. He sat there for a long moment, looking completely confused. I think for the first time he was starting to understand that his department's success had never been because of his management skills. Finally, he asked what I wanted. I laid out my terms clearly. I wanted my job title to reflect what I actually did. I wanted to be paid appropriately for the value I brought, and I wanted a formal apology for the years he'd spent dismissing my contributions. He stammered that he'd need to talk to HR about the title and salary adjustments. I told him that was great, and in the meantime, I'd keep doing exactly what my current job description said. 2 weeks later, I got promoted to technical director with a 40% raise and equity options. My manager also had to stand up in the next team meeting and acknowledge that the department's previous success had been largely due to my efforts. 3 months after my promotion, my old manager got transferred to a different department where he couldn't do any real damage. Apparently, upper management had figured out that he was basically dead weight, who'd been coasting on other people's work. I'm a software developer, and I moved into this neighborhood about 2 years ago because I wanted a peaceful place where my cat could safely enjoy some outdoor time. My cat is a beautiful orange tabby who's been with me for 5 years now. She's indoor-outdoor, meaning she spends most of her time inside but loves to roam around the yard and occasionally explore the neighborhood. She's friendly, well-behaved, and has never caused any real problems. The worst thing she's ever done is maybe leave paw prints on someone's car, which honestly isn't even that bad. The house next to mine is owned by this woman who I can only describe as the definition of entitled. She moved in about 8 months ago, and from day one she's been nothing but trouble. She's probably in her early 50s, drives a massive car that she parks like she owns the entire street, and has this attitude like everyone around her exists solely to inconvenience her life. Our first interaction was when she knocked on my door 3 days after moving in. She told me that my cat wasn't allowed in her yard. She didn't ask politely or express concern. She told me like she had some kind of authority over my pet. I explained that cats roam naturally and that my cat wasn't causing any damage, but she just huffed and walked off. Over the next few months, things got worse. She'd call the city about my cat being a nuisance, file noise complaints when my cat would meow outside, and even threaten to trap my cat and take her to the pound. I started keeping closer watch on my cat and tried to keep her in my own yard as much as possible. But you know how cats are, they go where they want to go. The situation reached its breaking point last Tuesday afternoon. I was working in my home office when I heard my cat yowling in a way I'd never heard before. It wasn't her normal meow, it was pure terror. I rushed to my window and saw the most insane thing I've ever witnessed. My neighbor was outside with her lawnmower, actively chasing my cat around her front yard. Not just mowing while my cat happened to be there, actually pursuing my cat was the running mower, trying to corner her. My cat was darting back and forth, clearly panicked, while this woman was literally hunting her with a piece of machinery. I ran outside immediately and started yelling at her to stop. She screamed back that this stupid cat had been in her yard for the last time, and she was going to teach it a lesson. I asked if she was insane for trying to hurt my cat with a lawnmower. She shouted that the cat was trespassing on her property and she had every right to remove it. My cat managed to dart behind a tree, but this woman was determined. She kept revving the mower and trying to maneuver it around the tree to get to my cat. I was absolutely horrified. I threatened to call the police if she didn't stop right now. She told me to go ahead and call them because this rat was going to learn not to mess with her. My cat made a break for it. She bolted from behind the tree, heading straight for my yard. But instead of letting her go, my neighbor actually accelerated the mower and tried to cut her off. My cat, being a cat, jumped right over the mower deck. But here's where it gets crazy. When my cat jumped, her tail brushed against my neighbor's hand that was gripping the mower handle. My cat's claws extended instinctively and she scratched my neighbor's hand and forearm pretty badly as she leaped to safety. The woman started screaming like she'd been attacked by a wild animal. She dropped the mower handle and was clutching her arm, which was bleeding from several deep scratches. She yelled that the vicious animal had attacked her and tried to kill her. I pointed out that she was literally chasing my cat with a lawnmower and that my cat was defending herself. She said that she was calling the police and animal control because that cat was dangerous. And she actually did call them. Within 20 minutes, there were 2 police cars and an ambulance in front of our houses. The paramedics were treating her scratches while she dramatically told anyone who would listen about how my violent cat had ambushed her. One officer asked her to explain what happened. She told him that my cat had attacked her unprovoked and that it was a menace to the neighborhood that needed to be put down immediately. I was about to defend my cat when my neighbor from across the street came walking over. He's this older gentleman who's lived here for like 20 years, and he had his phone in his hand. He told the officers that they needed to see something and showed them his phone. He had recorded the entire incident. The video clearly showed my neighbor chasing my cat with a lawnmower, my cat trying to escape, and the moment when my cat scratched her while jumping away from the dangerous situation. The officer asked my neighbor if the video accurately showed her pursuing the cat with her lawnmower. She said she was just trying to get it off her property. The officer asked if she was doing that by chasing it with a running lawnmower. She explained that the cat had been harassing her for months and she had a right to protect her property. The second officer told her that what she did actually constituted animal cruelty because she was using a dangerous weapon to threaten and potentially harm a domestic animal. She started backpedaling immediately and said that I didn't understand because the cat had attacked her. She pointed to her scratches as evidence. The officer explained that the scratches appeared to be defensive wounds from an animal trying to escape what it perceived as a threat, and that the video proved this story. They ended up arresting her for animal cruelty and reckless endangerment. When they were putting her in the police car, she was still screaming about how unfair it all was and how my cat was the real criminal. She kept saying that this was ridiculous because she was the victim and that my cat had tried to murder her. Later I found out that she had to pay for her own medical treatment since insurance doesn't cover injuries sustained while committing crimes. She also got slapped with a hefty fine and has to do community service at the local animal shelter. which I find absolutely hilarious given her obvious hatred of animals. My cat, meanwhile, is perfectly fine. She's been staying closer to home since the incident, but she's not traumatized or anything. She's just being a normal cat who now happens to have the distinction of being the only cat in the neighborhood with an arrest record. Well, technically her owner's arrest record, but still. Since then, things have been blissfully quiet. My neighbor hasn't spoken to me once, which is honestly the best outcome I could have hoped for. The other neighbors have been super supportive, and a few of them have told me they'd had their own issues with her entitled behavior. I found out she's moving out next month. Apparently, having an animal cruelty charge makes it harder to refinance your mortgage, and she's been having financial troubles. I can't say I'm sorry to see her go. My own brother pulled something I never expected. Let me start from the beginning. I'm 27 now, working as a software developer in the same city where I grew up. My brother is 2 years older than me. He's more of the social butterfly type, while I prefer smaller gatherings. We both still live close to our parents, maybe 20 minutes apart from each other. 8 years ago, I was dating this woman I met in college. We were together for 4 years, and things got serious. We talked about marriage, moving in together, the whole deal. She was smart, funny, and we clicked on so many levels. But life had other plans. When she graduated, she got a job offer 3 states away, and I had already committed to a position here in town. We tried the long-distance thing for about 6 months, but it wasn't working. The calls became less frequent, the visits were expensive and stressful, and eventually we both admitted it was over. The breakup was mutual but still hurt. We agreed it was better to make a clean break, so we didn't stay in touch afterward. Fast forward to about 3 months ago, I started noticing my brother acting weird. He'd get secretive phone calls and step out of the room. When we'd hang out, he seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. I figured he was just dating someone new and wanted to keep it private until things got serious. He'd done that before with other relationships. Then 2 weeks ago, I was at the grocery store when I saw them together. My brother and my ex-girlfriend, holding hands in the produce section like any other couple. I froze. They didn't see me, but I watched them for a few minutes, laughing and picking out vegetables together. It was surreal. I felt like I was in some weird alternate reality. I didn't confront him right away. I needed time to process what I'd seen. But the more I thought about it, the more confused and hurt I became. Not because I still had feelings for her. Those romantic feelings were long gone. But because my brother, the person I trusted most in the world, had been keeping this huge secret from me. Finally, I called him and asked him to meet me for coffee. I came straight out with it and told him I'd seen him with her at the store. He knew exactly who I meant, and his face went red. He said he could explain. I asked him how long this had been going on, and he admitted it had been about a year. A whole year. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I asked him why he hadn't mentioned it once during that entire time. He said he didn't want me to get angry with him because he knew how things had ended between us. I told him I wouldn't be angry and that we'd broken up 8 years ago. I just didn't understand why he felt like he had to hide it. He said it felt weird at first, and then the longer he waited, the harder it got to bring up. I left that conversation feeling unsettled but hoping we could move past it. Last weekend was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. Mom had been planning this party for months. She rented out a private room at their favorite restaurant, invited about 30 people. It was supposed to be a celebration of their love and commitment, a really special night for them. I arrived at the restaurant early to help set up decorations. My brother texted that he was running late but would be there soon. About an hour into the party, he walked in with his date. It was her, my ex-girlfriend, dressed up and smiling, walking into my parents' anniversary party on my brother's arm like she belonged there. I actually felt dizzy for a moment. I hadn't seen her face to face in 8 years, and suddenly she was right there at my family celebration, completely unexpected. My mom rushed over to greet them and told her how wonderful it was to see her again and how beautiful she looked. My ex thanked her for including her that night and congratulated my parents on 40 amazing years together. Dad chimed in that they were so glad she could make it and that she'd always been like family to them. I stood there watching this reunion feeling completely blindsided. My brother caught my eye across the room and gave me this sheepish look, but he didn't come over to explain or apologize. During dinner, things got worse. My brother stood up with his wine glass and said he had an announcement to make. He acknowledged that it was mom and dad's special night, but said they had news they wanted to share with the family. My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. He announced that they'd gotten engaged last month. He pulled out a ring box and she held up her hand to show off the diamond. The whole room erupted in cheers and applause. Mom started crying happy tears and said this was the best anniversary gift they could have asked for because their family was growing. Dad welcomed her back to the family with a big smile. Everyone was hugging and congratulating them. I sat there feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. This was happening at my parents' anniversary dinner, with no warning, no heads up, nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I quietly got up and walked toward the exit. My brother must have noticed because he followed me outside. He asked where I was going and I told him I couldn't do this right now. He told me not to be like this, but I said he'd ambushed me. I explained that he could have at least given me a heads up that he was bringing her tonight, let alone that he was planning to announce their engagement at mom and dad's party. He said he didn't think it would be a big deal. I asked him how he could not think it would matter. I pointed out that he'd been lying to me for a year and then sprung this on me at our parents' anniversary celebration. He argued that he wasn't lying, just that he didn't tell me. I said that was the same thing and questioned his decision to announce their engagement that night when it was supposed to be about mom and dad. He accused me of being selfish and making the celebration all about me while ruining our parents' night. I told him I wasn't making it about me and that I was trying to remove myself so I wouldn't actually ruin their night. He demanded that I come back inside and act like an adult. I asked him if he wanted to talk about acting like an adult, because adults communicate and don't sneak around for a year before dropping bombshells at family parties. I got in my car and drove home. About an hour later, my dad called and asked what had happened that night. He said my brother told him I'd walked out. I explained that I didn't walk out but left because I was uncomfortable. He asked what I was uncomfortable about and said this should be a happy time for our family. I asked if he'd known they were dating. He said my brother had mentioned it a few weeks ago and that they were thrilled for them. A few weeks ago. So my parents knew, but I didn't. Dad said he didn't understand why I was upset since we'd broken up years ago. I explained that I wasn't upset about them being together, but about my brother keeping it secret from me for a year and then announcing their engagement at his anniversary party without warning. He told me I'd embarrassed them that night because people were asking where I'd gone. I apologized and said I was trying not to cause a scene. He said I'd caused one anyway by leaving. The conversation ended badly. I've been replaying the whole thing in my head for days now. I keep wondering if I overreacted, but I don't think I did. It's not about my ex-girlfriend. I genuinely don't have romantic feelings for her anymore. It's about respect and communication, and not being blindsided by the people you trust most. My brother called yesterday and asked if I was going to keep acting like a child about this. I told him I wasn't acting like a child but was hurt that he didn't trust me enough to be honest with me. He said he was going to tell me eventually, and I asked if he meant at the wedding. He said he was sorry he didn't handle it perfectly, but that I was overreacting. He claimed everyone thought I was being ridiculous. When I asked who everyone was, he said mom, dad, and even she thought I was being weird about this. That hit me hard. They'd all been talking about me, judging my reaction. I told him he was right and that I was being ridiculous. I congratulated him on his engagement and said I hoped they'd be very happy together. He accused me of being sarcastic, but I insisted I wasn't. I explained that he clearly didn't need my blessing or input on his life decisions, so I'd just stay out of it from now on. I hung up and haven't answered his calls since. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I can't shake the feeling that my own brother treated me like I didn't matter enough to deserve the truth. I've been living in my condo complex for about 2 years now, and for the most part, it's been pretty peaceful. I have type 1 diabetes and something called dysautonomia, which basically means my nervous system doesn't work right and can make me feel terrible some days. On bad days, I need to use my wheelchair to get around because standing and walking becomes too much. Living here has been good because it's quiet and most of my neighbors are respectful. My brother lives nearby and I have a small group of friends who visit regularly. We like to try new food places together, which is how I ended up discovering this new cookie place called Crumble Cookies that just opened up. The only downside to living here is that one of my neighbors has this friend who visits sometimes. This woman is the most entitled person I've ever met. The first time I encountered her was a few months ago when I was having a really bad blood sugar episode. I was sitting outside my building waiting for my ride to the doctor, and I had two candy canes with me because my blood sugar had dropped dangerously low. I needed that sugar to keep from passing out. This woman saw me eating one of the candy canes and immediately told her daughter to go ask me for the other one. When I explained that I needed it for medical reasons, she got all huffy and told me I was being selfish and not teaching children proper sharing. I tried to explain that I'm diabetic and this was basically medicine for me, but she just rolled her eyes and called me dramatic. Ever since then, whenever she sees me, she gives me these dirty looks like I'm some kind of villain. So today I decided to finally try Crumble Cookies. I've been wanting to go for weeks, but kept putting it off. I bought 4 of their giant cookies, one for me, one for my brother, and 2 for my friends who were coming over later to watch movies. These cookies are huge and expensive, but I figured it would be a fun treat for all of us. My dysautonomia was acting up pretty badly today, so I had my wheelchair with me. After leaving the cookie place, I decided to sit at one of the little picnic tables in the courtyard area of my condo complex to enjoy my cookie and catch up on some things on my phone. I had work emails to respond to and some medical appointments to schedule. I was maybe halfway through my cookie when I heard that familiar voice that makes my blood pressure spike. Karen was pointing directly at my cookie box and telling her daughter to look at the 3 giant cookies inside. She was acting like my cookie box was some kind of treasure chest that belonged to everyone. Then Karen told her daughter to go ahead and pick out a cookie that she liked. She said it was very important to learn how to share with others. She also mentioned that I didn't share with a little girl the last time we saw each other, and maybe I had learned my lesson now. She was standing there with her arms crossed, giving me this smug look like she was some kind of teacher about to deliver a lesson. Her daughter started walking toward my table, clearly having been told this was okay, but I was faster. The moment I saw the little girl reaching for my cookie box, I snapped it shut and held it against my chest. The little girl looked shocked, like she genuinely expected to just be able to take whatever she wanted. The mother let out this incredibly obnoxious grunt that sounded like a frustrated teenager. Karen started complaining that I didn't need all those cookies. She brought up again how I didn't share with her daughter the last time and said she was trying to teach her manners and sharing. She insisted that we should share when we have more than what we need. I decided right then that I was going to handle this completely differently than last time. Instead of trying to explain myself to this woman who clearly doesn't listen, I was going to talk directly to her daughter. I told the little girl that I was going to teach her another very important lesson and asked if she could listen carefully. The little girl nodded. She seemed sweet enough, just poorly guided by her mother. I explained to her that she should never take food from a stranger and should only take food from people she knows. I told her that for all I knew, there could be something she was allergic to in these cookies, and that might make her very sick. I said I didn't want to accidentally give her something that might make her sick, and asked if she wanted that either. The little girl nodded again, and I could see she was actually listening and thinking about what I was saying. I continued by telling her that another thing to learn in life is that sometimes we can't always get what we want. I explained that she might want one of my cookies, but for all she knew, I had other people that I was going to share them with, and then they would be sad that they didn't get a cookie. I said we should always ask before taking things from someone. I could see the mother getting angrier by the second, but I wasn't done. I told the little girl that I would be happy to share a piece of my candy with her if she asked me nicely the next time I saw her, and if her mommy could confirm that there was nothing in it that might make her have an allergic reaction. The little girl smiled at me and said, "Okay and thank you." She seemed to genuinely understand what I was telling her. Karen looked like she wanted to reach across and slap me right across the head. Her hands were actually clenched into fists and her whole body was tense with anger. But here's the thing about being in a wheelchair in public. People really notice when someone is aggressive toward you. And there were plenty of people around enjoying the nice weather today. Families were out walking, people were sitting on other benches, kids were playing in the courtyard. Everyone would have seen if she had done anything physical. I think she realized this too because she just stood there seething for a moment before finally telling me I was ridiculous. Then she grabbed her daughter's hand and said they were leaving. She walked off toward one of the other buildings in the complex. The little girl looked back at me and waved, which honestly made my day. I sat there for a few more minutes, finishing my cookie and responding to emails. I wasn't lying about having people to share the cookies with. My brother was coming over in an hour and my friends were coming later. Maybe if they had asked nicely instead of just assuming they could take my food, I might have been willing to share the cookie I bought for myself. But both times I've encountered this entitled mother, she's just told her kid to take something from me without asking. That's not teaching sharing. That's teaching entitlement. That poor kid is going to grow up thinking she can just take whatever she wants from people if her mother keeps this up. The ironic thing is that I almost always have extra candy with me because of my diabetes. I keep little bags of Skittles and other quick sugar treats in my bag in case my blood sugar drops. If the kid had just asked nicely, I probably would have given her some candy without any problem. But the way this woman approaches every interaction is just demanding and rude. She acts like the world owes her and her daughter something just because they exist. She's basically the opposite of everything you'd want in a neighbor or community member. I finished my cookie and headed back inside, looking forward to sharing the other cookies with people who actually appreciate them. My brother loved his cookie, and when my friends came over later, they were so excited to try them. We had a great evening watching movies and talking about our week. When that entitled mother keeps visiting my neighbor, there's a good chance I'll run into her again. And if her daughter does ask me nicely for some candy next time, I'll absolutely follow through on my promise. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.